Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and another great week. Lots happening right now, not just here in America, but throughout the Western world. You have these psychos that exist. They've hijacked just about every single institution you could think of. And if you go against their narrow-minded points of view, they want to destroy you. Unfortunately, we see this societal shift, and it continues because there are so many people who have ignored the growing threat over the last 2 decades, but also because there are so many cowards out there who won't dare to speak up, who remain silent out of fear. Fear that they're going to be ostracized and labeled, fear that they'll be criticized, fear that some are going to disassociate from them, fear over their livelihoods being destroyed. Sure, if you speak out, you do run the risk of attacks on you. You run the risk of attacks on your character, your family, your livelihood. But if you remain silent, you could blend into the background, continue to live your life normally for a while. What you don't realize, though, is that eventually they're going to target you, whether you speak up or not. Only blind obedience will be tolerated and rewarded. These people have revealed themselves for who they really are, and everyone should be concerned. It shouldn't matter what your political ideology is. Remember, what might pass for the acceptable narratives of today may not be the acceptable narratives of tomorrow. It's why people should be terrified when they hear government officials utter the words unapproved opinions or cognitive infrastructure. I'm not going to lie. I've been surprised over the course of the last several years, particularly when it came to the coronavirus and the way people just surrendered their rights without any pushback at all, without any debate, without any questions. So this is what we're up against. And the more people are willing to surrender, the easier it becomes to target those who do speak up, who do speak out, who stand up for the silent majority that exists out there. Just look at what's going on with Jordan Peterson. They are demanding that he, quote-unquote, voluntarily submits to a re-education on proper social media usage. If he doesn't submit, but really if he doesn't surrender to them, because that's what they ultimately want, they want his surrender, and if he doesn't surrender, he risks losing his psychologist's license. The toxic culture is permeating throughout America and the Western world, a culture that attempts to redefine long-standing norms like gender, a culture that attempts to eliminate borders and, by extension, eliminate nation-states, a culture that attempts to govern every aspect of life and uses a backdoor attempt in their march towards socialism, eventually Marxism. This great reset that they're looking to achieve. And as they are on this journey to redefine America and the Western world, they are sucking the life out of entire generations. I'm going to break it all down for you in this episode. Before I do, make sure you visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. If you find the show informative, share it with your family and friends. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. And I'm going to start off by explaining the totalitarian attempt to re-educate Jordan Peterson because it demonstrates how authoritarian people in power really are. How they will seek and destroy anyone who doesn't behave the way they want or regurgitate the same boring narratives. If you don't subscribe to the groupthink mentality, you are the threat to them. And it's because those that do speak out, they are a threat. See, the arguments coming from the other side, they're so thin that they can't have a rational debate or discussion. It's why they resort to labels. It's why they resort to this idea of re-education. And I'll start with Jordan Peterson, and then I'll transition to how they successfully changed our culture, a culture built on self-reliance, personal responsibility, merit, to a culture that lacks a sense of purpose, lacks ambition, lacks basic social skills, and a sense of entitlement. This is what has led to the largest mental health crisis we've ever witnessed. So getting to the attempts to re-educate Jordan Peterson, some call Dr. Peterson controversial, but a lot of what he says isn't controversial at all. A lot of what he says is actually common sense. He says it far more articulately than I ever can, but it's not controversial. However, the governing body of psychologists is now threatening to pull Dr. Peterson's license. The College of Psychologists are unhappy with Dr. Peterson's social media posts and his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. That's a podcast I would love to get on, and I'd love to have Joe Rogan on mine. So if Joe Rogan, if you're listening, get in touch with me. But after several complaints by people, hardcore partisans, the College of Psychologists of Ontario reached out to Dr. Peterson and gave him an ultimatum. And we're seeing this in every Western society. There are licensing boards for a variety of professions out there, including here in America. These are usually government-run boards, and even if they're not government-run, the requirements to obtain the license are issued by the government, And you have this army of bureaucrats who are the main regulators that are mostly partisan hacks in this day and age. The purpose behind these institutions initially is to protect the public from misconduct or harm, ensuring some level of competency has to exist, but they go far beyond that now. And they're going beyond that because they are so incompetent. The complaints, they were all frivolous. One was Dr. Peterson calling for an end to draconian mask and lockdown mandates at the hands of the little Mussolini wannabes out there. He had the nerve, the audacity, to call for people to be left alone and let them live their lives.
How dare you?
How dare you, Dr. Peterson? He had the nerve to call someone a prick. He called Trudeau a puppet. After someone posted the world is overpopulated because human beings are self-absorbed, Dr. Peterson responded, he had the audacity to respond, that the person was free to leave at any point.
How dare you?
How dare you indeed. Because of these types of complaints, this triggered the College of Psychologists to hold disciplinary hearings as they deemed Dr. Peterson a threat. He's unprofessional. They called these incidents horrific, and he intended to spread misinformation. You see how that word has been weaponized over the last few years? I warned you about that. They also called him an embarrassment to the profession, but they're the real embarrassment. Notice how all these tweets, they're political in nature. They are not about psychology. They are not about clinical practice and medical malpractice. These are routine statements. These are routine ideas that should be debated in the public square. It used to be that free countries encouraged criticisms of government officials. They encourage criticisms of policies. That's how you keep the government honest, but not anymore. Not anymore. Just look at the last few years. You are no longer allowed to ask questions because questions represent a threat to their power. They wanted Jordan Peterson to sign a document admitting guilt of having, quote, lacked professionalism in public statements made on social media and on Joe Rogan's podcast. They wanted him to voluntarily submit to what they call a, quote-unquote, coaching program at his own expense, so he'd have to pay these morons, and there was no end date. The coaching program is nothing more than a re-education camp. The purpose of the re-education of Dr. Peterson is to get him to review and reflect on his professionalism in public statements and retrain him on how to properly engage on social media. These sessions would continue for an indefinite period of time until the re-educators themselves determine that Dr. Peterson has learned his lesson, that he's rehabilitated himself, that he promises to behave properly in the future. Isn't that a little Orwellian? They say that this re-education is voluntary, but that if he doesn't submit to their demands, he will lose his license. Oh, that sounds real voluntary to me. And I did an episode 2 years ago in 2021, and the title of that episode, Voluntary Guidance is Mandatory. It was episode 198. Check it out. It was a great episode. But the attempt to re-educate Jordan Peterson should fail. We shouldn't even have to discuss it, but we do. Now, Dr. Peterson responded appropriately. He told the College of Psychologists to go to hell. He is going to fight their accusations, both in the court system as well as the court of public opinion. He is fighting for freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. He's also stated that his end goal is to get the resignation of all those involved in this gross abuse of power, along with a public admission of wrongdoing. He's fighting for every one of you out there. He is fighting this to the end, and that's the way it should be. More people need to do this. And even more importantly, Dr. Peterson explains why everyone should care about this regardless of what country you live in or what side of the political aisle you're on. He explains how something has dreadfully gone wrong in Western civilization, and to show why you should be concerned, he has poignant questions. Questions I have raised since I started this podcast. What makes you think that something similar won't happen to you or someone you know or respect or even love? What makes you think you're going to continue to be able to communicate honestly with your physician, lawyers, teachers, psychologists? If we have to be terrified of regulatory bodies, of bureaucrats, well, then we can no longer tell the truth, can we? That's where the domestic terrorism label comes in. They want to instill that fear so you don't speak up. What are your children going to be taught when all their teachers are so afraid of the woke mobs that they push the ideological lies, even if they don't believe it? And Jordan Peterson asks profound question, where are we going to be if we allow criticism of the public figures charged with the privilege of our governance to be grounds for the demolition of not only the critic's reputation, but their livelihood as well? How far are we willing to go down this road without any resistance? Think about those questions. And some of you may be saying, well, this is a case in Canada. It has nothing to do with the United States. You're wrong. You're wrong. While the Peterson incident is in Canada, We've begun to witness the same thing here, have we not? Throughout the coronavirus, medical boards in the United States were penalizing doctors, still are penalizing doctors who they deem are spreading COVID misinformation. Since January 2021, at least 8 doctors have been sanctioned. The disciplinary actions range from suspension to revoking the physician's license. And who knows how many physicians are currently under investigation for what these boards deem as COVID misinformation. Dr. McCullough's fighting this out in court. And if you really believe that this isn't a problem here, just take a look at California, Assembly Bill 2098. It's currently being challenged, thankfully, but this law is specifically designed to target the licenses of any doctor that doesn't subscribe to the government-approved COVID messaging. So if a doctor goes against the government-approved messaging, that doctor could lose their license at the hands of a government bureaucrat. The law designates, quote, the dissemination of misinformation or disinformation related to the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus or COVID-19 as unprofessional conduct, end quote. So let me ask you something. Are you going to be pulling Dr. Fauci's license when he told us that if you get the vaccine, you don't have to worry about coronavirus at all? What about the National Institute of Health? How many of them came out? You know how many commercials I saw of doctors coming out there stating that the COVID vaccine, I wouldn't give my children anything that wasn't perfectly safe. We were inundated with commercials like that in New York. So are they going to lose their license? See, this will become the norm in many professions because there aren't enough Jordan Petersons out there speaking up. And to all the far-left professors out there, as we go down this dangerous road, how long before academic freedom evaporates? What happens when you misspeak in class or bring up a controversial topic? What happens when the powers that be deem that you have caused harm to your student body because a student may have been offended by what you said? How will you like it when you are required to be re-educated? Oh, wait, it's already happening to college professors. You have Evergreen State College, Portland State, the University of Pennsylvania, MIT, University of Chicago, UC Irvine, Princeton. These are just some. These are just some of the higher education institutions that targeted professors for not subscribing to the groupthink mentality. Professors from these institutions were forced out, they were punished, they were disciplined, and believe me, the list goes on and on. This is nothing more than totalitarianism, and anyone trying to defend this crap is nothing more than an authoritarian at heart. But that is their point. It is authoritarianism. These people are corrupted by power and want even more. Now, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I will show you exactly how people like these are threatening the fabric of a free society and destroying individualism. I'll be right back. As someone who worked in emergency management, I routinely sounded the alarm bells on our outdated grid system. Think back to 2003 when a tree branch hit a power line in Ohio, shutting down power to the entire eastern seaboard. Around 100 people died, and this was one of the costliest disasters in American history, with losses totaling over $60 billion. Even the White House sees it. They're saying 2/3 of the grid are at least 25 years old, and they recently announced billions of dollars to update it. But we're talking about the government here. How long do you think that's going to take, if at all? When an incident happens, you have to rely on yourself. Be prepared for yourself and your family. With the Patriot Power Generator, you get a solar generator that doesn't install into your house because it's portable. You can take it with you, even use it inside. But it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, and even your fridge. Right now, you can go to 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the Patriot Power Generator. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. A portion of every sale is donated to charities who support veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get yours today. Welcome back. Getting back to the subject, as they continue to push nonsense like this, threatening the fabric of any free society, what good has it led to? And the answer is simple. Nothing. Nothing. In fact, they are harming the essential characteristics that led the United States to become the greatest power to ever exist. Our country was built on principles of self-reliance, personal responsibility, and individualism, but they want to erase that from our culture. They are creating a culture of mediocrity and subservience. Many within our culture no longer strive to go above and beyond. Hard work and merit are going by the wayside. Bernie Marcus, one of the co-founders of Home Depot, stated that between the lack of ambition and the government regulations, Home Depot wouldn't have been able to get off the ground today. And he said that the radical push to remake our society is why, quote, nobody works, nobody gives a damn, just give it to me, send me money, I don't want to work, I'm too lazy, I'm too fat, I'm too stupid, end quote. And guess what? People are criticizing him. People are criticizing him for what he is saying. Now, he is not wrong. And the criticisms aren't based on the content of what he is saying. The criticisms are centered around what some deem to be offensive. They don't like the fact that he used the words lazy, fat, and stupid. That's what they're mad about. It's just more evidence that there are so many people out there who are blinded by emotion. They're blinded by words rather than using reason and logic. Too many who want to pretend that all this is normal. Too many who reject the answers to basic questions, who deny truth.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
And when you reject basic truths, yes, you can handle the truth. But remember, the truth exists in everything. It does not need our acceptance to give it its binding force of validity. Boo friggin' who? He used words like lazy and fat. That's true. Using the CDC's own numbers, the obesity rate in the United States has climbed to 42%. Among children, it's 20%. Over the last 40 years, obesity rates have quadrupled. Diabetes rates are projected to increase by 54% by 2030. 1/3 of our youth are too obese for military service. There's your truth, but we're supposed to ignore all that. Apparently, going to the gym is now racist. Being physically fit is nothing more than white supremacy. You are not allowed to speak obvious truths anymore. You must deny truth so that others can feel good about themselves. The public virtue signalers and the moral holy warriors. This is the idiocy of today's mindset. And just look at the numbers. A new survey was done by Qualtrics where 36% of respondents said their overall career ambitions have decreased. 40% said that work is less important to them. According to the American Bar Association, 44% of young lawyers stated they would leave their jobs for a greater ability to work remotely. You know, it used to be that people had ambition, they had drive, they saw promotion. But in today's day and age, managers, they're trying to proactively identify employees that should be promoted. And where has this gotten us? Well, it's led to productivity levels declining by 5.9%. People are less productive and much less ambitious today compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago. And it goes directly to Bernie Marcus's point. So you want to criticize him for speaking the truth, fine. But the truth is that he is right. You have many out there who are unwilling to do what it takes, and yet they still believe that they're entitled to achieve the American dream. And this isn't even the worst of it. Generation Z is in the midst of a full-blown crisis that so many people are ignoring, or they simply blame Generation Z for this crisis. And I'm going to pick up on that after this short break. Let's focus on Generation Z for a minute, because I just wrote a piece for Campus Reform on the crisis raging among Generation Z. And you can check it out at campusreform.org or go to PASreport.com. I have the link up there, so check it out, read the article. I think it was a great article I wrote. And I've been in the classroom for 17 years, 8 years as an adjunct, 10 years as a full-timer. I have noticed a major change in student behaviors. I have noticed a major change in the mindset of the student body. There are a lot of students today that lack basic social skills. They have difficulty interacting with other students, holding conversations. They have difficulty interacting with their teachers and professors. Just to give you one example, when I walk into most of my classes, it's complete silence. Complete silence. Nobody's talking to each other. And if the light isn't on before I walk in, none of the students will think to flip the switch, turn the lights on. Instead, they sit there in complete silence, they stare at the glows of their phones, and they tap and swipe mindlessly. I had one class last semester that was loud, and it reminded me of back in the day. Students were interacting, they were laughing with each other, making friends, getting to know one another. In fact, they were so loud, I would have to tell them to pipe down as I took attendance. And it's so rare these days that it was actually refreshing to teach that course. Then you have the students that are just satisfied with getting by. This goes to the lack of ambition I just talked about. Only it's not in the workplace that we're seeing this lack of ambition. We're seeing it in the classroom as well. The amount of students that are satisfied with a C or D, it's astounding. As long as they just pass the course, they're happy. And this is a recent phenomenon. It's crazy to me. They don't take pride in their work. Some even joke that they don't start the paper until the day it's due. They admit that they rushed it, that they didn't put any effort. And they laugh when they're saying it. There is no shame anymore. And they say the things that none of us would have said, at least out loud, back in the day. Then you have the students that display this sense of entitlement, believing that they deserve to pass a course simply for showing up to the class. This, too, is a new phenomenon. I constantly get emails from students at the end of the semester. Why did I fail the course, Professor? I completed the assignments. I attended class. Meanwhile, they failed every exam with 30s and 40s. They received a D on the research papers, and they got through a couple assignments. Big whoop. You take those problems individually and you see how bad it's gotten in the classroom, but when you put them together and you factor in the growing mental health crisis, it's a full-blown catastrophe that's going on with Generation Z. Every single teacher listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. They're shaking their head, oh yeah, he's right. And it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle they subscribe to. We are all witnessing it. And many argue that this is due to social media and technology. But blaming social media, that's the easy way out. It allows people to deflect blame. This is not to say that the internet and social media haven't played a role. They certainly have. A recent JAMA study found that frequent use of social media leads to changes in brain development of young people. In the Morning Consult survey, 54% of Gen Zers spend 4 or more hours per day on social media compared to 53% of other generations who spend less than 2 hours a day. So social media and the internet have played a huge role. But then that doesn't get to the root cause of the problem. Some blame Gen Z for the problems on themselves, on their generation. But it's not their fault either. And we have to be honest about this. Even though we can't have an honest conversation in this day and age, it may get you to lose your license. But much of the blame actually lies with Generation X. It lies with Generation Y and the millennials. This is where we begin to see the family structure morph and the mindset of parenting begin to change. You have helicopter parents and the everyone gets a trophy mentality. That begins to emerge. You have this idea of instant gratification becoming the norm. You have inventions like the selfie stick, only to make us more narcissistic than we already are. It was our generation that has been lowering the standards throughout academia and throughout society. It was Generation X and Y that banned speakers from college campuses and created safe spaces. Parents that allowed children to spend endless hours on their electronic devices mindlessly tapping and swiping. It was Generation X and Y and the baby boom generation that were responsible for locking down Gen Z during the pandemic, socially isolating them, quadrupling their screen time because they were selfish. They were the ones that shut down the schools. It wasn't Generation Z that shut down the schools. So we could stop blaming Generation Z for the problems that we actually created. We went from a society of traditional values, family, faith, and country, to one of decadence, where success would be defined by materialism. The more stuff you have, the happier you're supposed to be. At least that's what we were told. That's what we were led to believe. But it turns out that the stuff that we have has not made us any happier at all. Everyone was lied to, and we lied to ourselves. We devalued family, enabling people and groups to openly call for the abolishment of the nuclear family. We continue to witness an exodus from organized religion and faith. Rather than focus on our rich and unique history, there are those constantly denigrating the country, pushing false narratives like the 1619 Project, which has been adopted by over 4,500 schools throughout the United States. The crisis continues to worsen as we move away from some of the traditional values. You want to get to the root of the problem? The root of the problem is how so many believe that their life lacks any purpose. That's the problem. Too many were never given a sense of self-worth and personal responsibility. And that's what the powers that be want. If you're distracted, if you believe your life lacks purpose, you're going to look for something to fill that void. That's where the authoritarianism kicks in. People look to government to solve the problem. A whole generation where very few take pride in their work, where very few exercise personal responsibility. Instead, we throw devices at them. We throw these devices to distract them from building meaningful relationships, to give them meaningful purpose in life. They've been indoctrinated with the belief and inundated with propaganda that they live in a racist country, that they are the oppressors or the oppressed. When it comes to Gen Z, mediocrity is rewarded while hard work and academic merit are penalized, all in the name of equity, as we've seen, where we see academic achievement awards actually being held back so that other students don't feel bad about themselves. We have a war on achievement. So do we really have to wonder why Generation Z is depressed, anxious, and detached? Do we really have to wonder why it feels like this country and the Western world is on the verge of collapse? I don't think we need to wonder. It's all right in front of us. And it's our fault because too many of us remain silent. I hope you found the content of this episode informative. Please share it with your family, friends on social media. I think it's important that parents need to hear this. Also, take 30 seconds, write a review on any podcast platform that allows it, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Audible, and leave a 5-star rating. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of P.A.S. Report Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast. so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.